Four homeless little girls find a billionaire at their mother's grave. The billionaire asks a question and their answer makes him cry. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The autumn wind swept through Oakwood Cemetery, rustling the fallen leaves across the perfectly manicured grounds. Matthew Porter pulled his cashmere coat tighter around his tall frame as he made his way through the silent rows of headstones. His polished Italian shoes crunched on the gravel path, the only sound besides the occasional distant call of a mourning dove. It had been 10 years. 10 years since he'd held his daughter's hand for the last time. 10 years of emptiness, of existing rather than living. The marble headstone stood elegant and pristine against the backdrop of maple trees turning crimson and gold. Sarah Elizabeth Porter, it read. Beloved daughter. Forever 16. Matthew placed a bouquet of white roses, Sarah's favorite, carefully against the cool stone. His fingers traced the engraved letters of her name, a ritual he performed every month without fail. Hello, sweetheart, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Dad's here. At 52, Matthew Porter looked every bit the successful tech mogul he was. Silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, fine lines around his eyes from years of focus and determination. Forbes had recently valued his company at $11 billion. He had homes in 5 countries. And yet here, kneeling before his daughter's grave, he was simply a father with an emptiness nothing could fill. He sat on the small bench he'd had installed beside her grave, preparing for his monthly one-sided conversation, when movement caught his eye. Through the thinning trees, he spotted 4 small figures approaching a grave several plots away. Children. 4 girls of varying heights, their clothes noticeably worn and mismatched. The oldest appeared to be around 12, holding the hand of the smallest, who couldn't be more than 6. The 2 middle girls carried small bunches of wildflowers, white daisies picked from somewhere nearby. Matthew watched, curiosity interrupting his grief. Children rarely visited the cemetery, especially alone. The oldest girl directed the others with gentle authority, helping the youngest place her flowers, straightening the arrangement with care. Their quiet voices carried on the breeze, too distant to make out the words, but their reverence was clear. They stood in a small semicircle, heads bowed for a moment, before the smallest girl looked up and directly at Matthew. Even from this distance, he could see her bright smile as she waved enthusiastically. Caught. Watching, Matthew nodded awkwardly in acknowledgement. He expected them to leave, but instead, after a brief conference, the 4 began making their way toward him. Hello, mister, the oldest said, approaching with caution but surprising poise. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her eyes too serious for someone so young. We didn't mean to disturb you. You didn't, Matthew responded, surprised by the girl's composure. I was just visiting. The smallest girl peered around her older sister, blue eyes wide with curiosity. She clutched a tattered stuffed rabbit missing one ear. Who are you visiting? She asked, her voice small but clear. Matthew glanced at Sarah's headstone. My daughter. The oldest girl nudged the little one. That's not polite to ask, Abby. But the youngest, Abby, stepped forward, looking at Sarah's name with newfound interest. Is that Sarah? She asked, pointing to the headstone. Matthew's breath caught. Yes. How did you? We're visiting Tia Sarah too, Abby announced proudly. Mommy said she's our guardian angel in heaven. The second oldest girl, noticing Matthew's confusion, quickly added, She means we're visiting Mommy, but she always told us about Sarah, the angel who watches over us. Matthew felt the world tilt slightly beneath him. Your mother knew my Sarah? The oldest girl nodded solemnly. I'm Emma Miller. These are my sisters, Lily, Sophie, and Abby. She gestured to each in turn. Our mom was Jessica Miller. She was a nurse at Memorial Children's Hospital. The name hit Matthew like a physical blow. Jessica Miller. Of course he remembered her. The kind-faced nurse with gentle hands who had stayed with Sarah through the worst nights, who had somehow coaxed smiles from his daughter when no one else could. Your mother? Matthew's voice faltered. She took care of Sarah during her treatments. Emma nodded, a shadow crossing her young face. Mom passed away 6 months ago, but she always told us to remember Sarah. She said they made a promise to each other. Matthew looked at these 4 girls, their worn clothes, the too thin frames of the older ones, the smudges of dirt on their faces that spoke of neglect, and felt something stir within him that had been dormant for a decade. What promise? He asked softly. It was the 3rd child, Sophie, who answered, her voice solemn beyond her years. Mommy said she promised Sarah that she would never be alone, and Sarah promised Mommy that she would watch over all of us from heaven. She pointed to the neighboring grave they had been visiting, a simple marker compared to Sarah's elaborate monument. Matthew stood slowly, drawn to the modest headstone. Jessica Marie Miller, it read. Beloved mother and healer, forever in our hearts. As he stared at the name, Abby slipped her small hand into his. The touch, the first genuine human contact he'd allowed himself to feel in years, sent a jolt through him. Are you Sarah's daddy? She asked, looking up at him with innocent curiosity. Matthew nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Then you're the one Mommy said would be okay someday. Abby said with the certainty only a child could possess. She told Sarah not to worry about you anymore. A single tear escaped before Matthew could stop it, tracing a path down his weathered cheek. For 10 years he had visited this cemetery carrying his grief like armor. Never once had he imagined finding a connection to Sarah here, a thread of her life he hadn't known about, preserved in these 4 small girls with wildflowers in their hands. Would you like to put one of our flowers on Sarah's grave? Lily, the 2nd oldest, offered, holding out a perfect white daisy. Matthew accepted it, his billion-dollar hands trembling as they closed around the humble stem. Together with the 4 sisters, he placed the wildflower among the expensive roses. Thank you, he managed. I think she would have liked that very much. As the autumn wind picked up again, rustling through the cemetery trees, Matthew Porter stood beside the Miller sisters, feeling for the first time in a decade that something fundamental had shifted in his world. He didn't yet know how these 4 girls would change his life. He couldn't have imagined the journey that was about to begin. But standing there looking at the white daisy resting against his daughter's name, Matthew felt something he had thought forever lost to him. That night, Matthew paced his empty mansion, unable to sleep. The encounter with the Miller sisters had shaken him to his core. His thoughts swirled with memories of Sarah and fragments of conversations with Jessica, the nurse who had shown such kindness during his darkest hours. He wandered into his home office, a space untouched by time. The same leather chair, the same mahogany desk, the walls lined with awards he no longer cared about. In a bottom drawer, locked away for years, was a box containing Sarah's personal items. With trembling hands, he opened it for the first time since her death. Sarah's journal lay on top, its purple cover worn from daily use. Matthew had never found the courage to read it before. Now he carefully turned the pages, his daughter's handwriting a painful reminder of all he had lost. And then he saw it, an entry dated 3 months before she died. Nurse Jessica told me the funniest story today about her daughters. The little one, Abby, tried to help by washing the cat with bubble bath. I was laughing so hard Mom thought something was wrong. It's nice to laugh again. Jessica makes the hospital feel less scary. She promised she'd look after Dad if anything happens to me. I told her he's stubborn and works too much, but she just smiled and said, Everyone needs someone to care, Sarah, even billionaires. Matthew's vision blurred with tears. All these years, he'd locked himself away, buried himself in work, rejected every attempt at friendship. And all along, Sarah had worried about him, had tried to ensure someone would break through his walls. The doorbell rang, startling him from his thoughts. At 2 a.m., it could only be one person. You look terrible, James Anderson said bluntly, stepping inside. His oldest friend and attorney was the only person who still checked on him regularly, despite Matthew's best efforts to push him away. I need your help, Matthew said, ignoring the comment. 4 girls at the cemetery today. The Miller sisters. Their mother was Sarah's nurse. James raised an eyebrow. And? Something's wrong. They looked neglected. I need to know they're safe. James sighed. Matt, you can't save everyone. I'm not trying to save everyone, Matthew replied, his voice firm. Just these 4 girls. There's a connection, James, to Sarah. I need to understand it. James studied his friend carefully. For a decade, he'd watched Matthew retreat from life, refusing comfort, rejecting connection. This was the first time in years he'd shown interest in anything beyond his companies. Okay, James finally said. I'll have my investigator look into the Miller family first thing tomorrow. As James left, Matthew returned to Sarah's journal, reading through the night. Jessica appeared in entry after entry, bringing small gifts, telling stories, sitting with Sarah when Matthew was stuck in meetings. By dawn, Matthew had made a decision. He would find these girls again. Not just to learn more about their connection to Sarah, but because something in Abby's innocent eyes and Emma's too adult responsibility had awakened something he thought had died with his daughter. A purpose beyond mere existence. The following Saturday, Matthew returned to the cemetery, his heart racing with anticipation. Would the girls come again? He waited by Sarah's grave, pretending to arrange fresh flowers while scanning the pathways. After an hour, he spotted them, 4 small figures making their way through the headstones. This time, he noticed details he'd missed before. Emma's protective stance as she guided her sisters, Lily's careful steps, Sophie's thoughtful expression, and little Abby skipping despite the solemn setting. You came back, Emma said, surprised to see him. Her auburn hair was pulled back in the same practical ponytail, but today there was a small clip attempting to keep her bangs from falling into her eyes. I did, Matthew replied, trying to sound casual. I thought maybe we could talk a bit more. The girls exchanged glances, a silent communication that spoke of their close bond. We're the Miller sisters, Emma finally said, taking charge of the introduction. I'm Emma. I'm 12. This is Lily. She's 10. Sophie is 8, and Abby just turned 6 last month. It's nice to meet you properly, Matthew said. I'm Matthew Porter, Sarah's father. Porter like Porter Technology? Sophie asked, eyes widening. We learned about your company in school before. She trailed off, looking down. Before we had to stop going, Lily finished quietly. Matthew felt a twinge of concern. You don't go to school? Emma's posture stiffened. It's complicated. We had to move after Mom died. The new school needs papers from our stepdad, but he's busy. The way she said busy told Matthew everything he needed to know. Your stepdad takes care of you now? He asked carefully. A shadow crossed Emma's face. He's supposed to, but he's not home much. Would you like to get some hot chocolate? Matthew offered, sensing their discomfort. There's a cafe near here. 20 minutes later, Matthew watched in quiet distress as the girls devoured hot chocolates and pastries like they hadn't eaten properly in days. Even Emma, with her determination to appear in control, couldn't hide her hunger. Mom worked at the hospital for 15 years, Emma explained between bites. She loved her job, especially working with the kids. She always told us stories about Sarah, Sophie added, how brave she was and how she made everyone laugh even when she was so sick. Abby, chocolate smeared around her mouth, looked up at Matthew. Mom said Sarah was the strongest person she ever met. That's why she's such a good angel. Matthew felt his throat tighten. Your mother was very kind to Sarah, and to me. Would you like to see where we live? Lily asked suddenly. It's not far. Despite Emma's warning glance, Matthew accepted. Something told him he needed to see their living conditions. As they walked, James called with preliminary findings. Matthew stepped away to take the call. The girl's mother died of pneumonia 6 months ago, James reported. She left them with their stepfather, Victor Miller. He's got a record, mostly petty theft, some fraud. There's something else. Jessica inherited money from a relative shortly before her death. Nearly $500,000. No sign of it now. The girls mentioned they had to move. Matthew murmured. That tracks, James replied. Their previous home was sold 3 months ago. As Matthew hung up, he looked at the 4 waiting sisters with new understanding. These girls weren't just connected to Sarah. They needed help. And perhaps in helping them, he might finally honor the promise Jessica had made to his daughter all those years ago. The apartment building loomed before them, a crumbling 5-story structure with boarded windows and graffiti-covered walls. Matthew's luxury sedan looked absurdly out of place as he parked along the curb. Emma led the way, clutching a key attached to a frayed string around her neck. "We're on the 3rd floor," she explained, guiding them upstairs with missing handrails. The stairwell smelled of mildew and urine, causing Matthew to breathe through his mouth. Their apartment was small but scrupulously clean, a stark contrast to the building itself. Matthew recognized the desperate efforts of children trying to maintain order. A single mattress lay in one corner covered with neatly arranged blankets. A small table held school books and a few toys. "You all sleep here?" he asked, noticing the lack of beds. "We share," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "It's warmer that way." The kitchen consisted of a hot plate and a mini refrigerator. Opening it, Matthew found only a half-gallon of milk and some sliced bread. "Victor brings food sometimes," Lily said, noticing his expression. "When he remembers." Sophie tugged at Matthew's sleeve. "Want to see Mom's special box? It has Sarah's pictures." The special box was a battered shoebox hidden under a loose floorboard. Inside were photographs, letters, and a small leather-bound journal. Matthew's hands trembled as he found a picture of Sarah in her hospital bed, smiling despite the tubes and monitors, Jessica sitting beside her. "Mom kept everything about Sarah," Emma explained. "She said it was important to remember special people." A yellowed envelope caught Matthew's attention. Inside was a letter in Sarah's handwriting. "Dear Jessica, thank you for being my friend when I needed one most. Please don't worry about Dad after I'm gone. He's stronger than he thinks. But if you ever see him looking lost, remind him that I want him to be happy again. Love, Sarah." Matthew's vision blurred with tears. Another envelope contained official-looking documents, financial statements, a will, property deeds. "These are your mother's financial papers," Matthew said, examining them. "Did you know she inherited money from a relative?" The girls looked confused. "Mom said Aunt Martha left us something," Emma replied. "But Victor said it was just enough to pay old bills." Matthew's jaw tightened as he came across a document with 2 signatures, Jessica's and Victor's, transferring property rights and financial assets. Even to his untrained eye, Jessica's signature looked forged. "Where is Victor now?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Working," Emma said with a shrug. "He won't be back until late, maybe tomorrow." Matthew continued, examining the documents when Abby climbed into his lap, a faded photo album in her small hands. "These are pictures of Mommy and us," she announced, opening to the first page. The contrast was heartbreaking. Earlier photos showed a loving family with a healthy, smiling Jessica and well-dressed children. More recent ones revealed Jessica's deteriorating health and the girl's increasingly worn appearance. As Abby turned pages, Matthew noticed Sophie's labored breathing and the way she occasionally coughed. Lily seemed unnaturally thin, while Emma's wrists protruded sharply from her sleeves. His decision crystallized in that moment. He couldn't leave these children here. His phone vibrated. A text from James. "Background check complete. Victor Miller. Committed fraud twice. Currently on probation. Call me ASAP." As Matthew prepared to excuse himself to make the call, the apartment door banged open. A man stood swaying in the doorway, his bloodshot eyes narrowing at the unexpected visitor. "Who the hell are you?" Victor Miller demanded, alcohol heavy on his breath. Matthew stood slowly, placing himself between the girls and their stepfather. "I'm Matthew Porter," he replied calmly, "and I think we need to talk about these children." "Matthew Porter?" Victor's bloodshot eyes widened with recognition. "The billionaire? What are you doing in my place?" Matthew maintained his calm exterior, though anger simmered. beneath. I'm a friend of the family. I was just checking on the girls. Victor's gaze darted between Matthew and the children, calculation replacing his initial surprise. Emma had pulled her sisters behind her, Abby clinging to her leg, fear evident in all their faces. Well, ain't that nice, Victor slurred, attempting an ingratiating smile that didn't reach his eyes. These girls are my responsibility, though. My stepdaughters. Got the papers and everything. Yes, I've seen some interesting papers today, Matthew replied, his voice deceptively soft. Including financial documents with Jessica's signature that look suspiciously forged. Victor's face hardened. You should leave, now. Gladly, Matthew said. And the girls are coming with me. Like hell they are. Victor lunged forward, but alcohol made him clumsy. Matthew easily sidestepped, placing himself more firmly between the man and the children. You're drunk, Victor. These children haven't been properly cared for in months. They're malnourished, possibly sick, and living in deplorable conditions. You got no right. Victor spat, his friendly facade evaporating. They're my meal ticket. The moment the words left his mouth, Victor seemed to realize his mistake. Matthew's expression turned to stone. What did you just say? Victor backpedaled, both literally and figuratively. Nothing. I meant I'm responsible for them. Their welfare checks come to me. And Jessica's inheritance? Matthew pressed. The house that was sold? The $500,000? Victor's hand moved toward his pocket. Matthew tensed, but instead of a weapon, Victor pulled out his phone. I'm calling the cops. You're trespassing. Excellent idea, Matthew agreed. I'm sure they'll be very interested in these financial documents and in the condition of these children. Victor's finger hovered over his phone. Behind Matthew, Abby began to cough, a deep, rattling sound that shook her tiny frame. Everyone turned to look as the coughing intensified, the little girl's face turning alarmingly red. She needs a doctor, Matthew said, immediately moving to the child. He placed a hand on her forehead. She's burning up. Emma looked terrified. She's been coughing all week. I gave her the medicine Mom left, but it ran out. Making a split-second decision, Matthew scooped Abby into his arms. I'm taking her to the hospital. The rest of you come with me. You can't just... Victor began, but Matthew cut him off. Call the police, Victor. I'll be happy to explain why I'm taking a dangerously ill child to get medical attention. He fixed Victor with a stare that had made corporate rivals crumble. Or you can step aside now and we can discuss this when you're sober. Victor faltered, self-preservation winning over greed. He stepped back, muttering threats. Matthew carried Abby down the stairs, her sisters following closely. The little girl's breathing was labored, her small body radiating heat. Get in, he said, unlocking his car. Emma hesitated only briefly before helping her sisters into the back seat. Where are we going? Lily asked, her voice small. First, to the hospital for Abby, Matthew replied, starting the engine, then somewhere safe. As they pulled away, he caught Emma's eye in the rearview mirror. I promise you, this ends today. All of it. The fear in her eyes was tempered with something Matthew hadn't seen there before, the faintest glimmer of hope. Matthew's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass tower in the heart of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking panoramic views, while minimalist furniture in muted grays and blacks created an atmosphere of sophisticated sterility. It was a space designed for a solitary man, devoid of warmth, color, or any hint of childhood. Until now. Your house is in the sky, Sophie whispered, pressing her nose against the glass, her breath fogging the immaculate surface. 24 hours after their escape from Victor's apartment, the 3 older Miller sisters were exploring their temporary sanctuary, while Abby remained hospitalized with pneumonia. It's not really a house, Matthew replied, watching the girls' reactions with an odd mixture of anxiety and pride. More of an apartment, a penthouse. It's bigger than our whole building, Lily observed, running her hand along the cool marble kitchen counter. Emma, ever vigilant, remained close to Matthew, as if expecting him to change his mind at any moment. How long can we stay? she asked directly. The question hung in the air. Matthew hadn't thought beyond getting them to safety. The previous night had been a blur of hospital forms, doctors' concerned faces, and urgent calls to James about temporary guardianship, as long as you need to, he finally answered. Until we sort everything out. Emma's skeptical expression spoke volumes about how many adult promises she'd seen broken. The sound of the elevator made them all turn. James stepped out, carrying several shopping bags. Clothes, toiletries, and some basic necessities, he announced, setting them down. My assistant guessed the sizes. Matthew introduced the girls to his attorney, explaining that James was helping them with their situation. The lawyer's usually stern face softened as he greeted each sister. While the girls explored their new clothes, James pulled Matthew aside. We've got a problem, he murmured. Victor's claiming the girls were kidnapped. He's filed a police report. Matthew's jaw tightened. That's absurd. He was drunk, neglectful. I know, James interrupted. But legally, he's their guardian. The hospital's filing a report with Child Protective Services about Abby's condition, which helps our case, but we need to move quickly. What do we need? Evidence of the financial fraud, proof of neglect, and someone with standing to petition for guardianship. James hesitated. Matt, why are you doing this? You've avoided attachments for 10 years and suddenly you're fighting for custody of 4 children you just met. Matthew looked over at the girls. Lily was showing Emma a sparkly shirt from the shopping bags, her face lighting up with a joy that seemed out of place given their circumstances. Sarah asked Jessica to look after me, he said quietly. Instead, Jessica died and left 4 daughters with no one to protect them. It feels like completing a circle somehow. James studied his friend's face. You know this won't be easy. Not even for a man with your resources. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Later that evening, after a dinner where the girls marveled at the variety of foods delivered from Matthew's favorite restaurant, he received a call from the hospital. Abby was stable but would need to stay for several more days. Can we visit her tomorrow? Emma asked, hovering nearby during the call. Of course, Matthew promised, first thing in the morning. As bedtime approached, a new challenge emerged. The penthouse had 4 bedrooms, but the girls refused to be separated. We always sleep together, Lily explained, anxiety creeping into her voice. Matthew quickly rearranged one of the guest rooms, pushing furniture aside to make space for a makeshift bed, large enough for 3. He watched as Emma tucked in her sisters with practiced efficiency, murmuring reassurances about Abby. Standing in the doorway, observing the small family within his sterile home, Matthew realized he had no idea what he was doing. But for the first time in a decade, he was doing something that mattered. You have to hold the spoon like this, Matthew demonstrated, guiding Lily's hand as she attempted to measure baking powder. 3 days into their new living arrangement, they were attempting to make pancakes, the girls' first home-cooked breakfast since their mother died. The kitchen, previously used only for coffee and takeout storage, had transformed into a flour-dusted battlefield. Sophie sat cross-legged on the counter, reading instructions from a recipe found online, while Emma carefully flipped a misshapen pancake, her face intense with concentration. Is it supposed to look like that? Sophie asked doubtfully, pointing at the lumpy batter. I have absolutely no idea, Matthew admitted, earning surprised giggles from the girls. Cooking wasn't included in my CEO training. The pancakes turned out edible, if oddly shaped, a victory they celebrated like a major achievement. These small moments of normalcy had become precious, bridging the vast differences between Matthew's world and the girls. After breakfast, they visited Abby at the hospital, bringing a hand-drawn card and a stuffed rabbit Matthew had impulsively purchased at the gift shop. The little girl's condition was improving, her fever finally broken, though the doctors wanted to monitor her for another day. When can we take her home? Lily asked, her small hand slipping naturally into Matthew's as they left the hospital. The casual gesture caught him off guard, this unearned trust from a child who had every reason to be wary of adults. Tomorrow, if all goes well, he promised. Back at the penthouse, while the girls settled in for a movie Matthew had never seen, something about princesses with magical powers, he retreated to his office for a video call with James. "The investigation is progressing," James reported. "We've confirmed Victor forged Jessica's signature on at least 8 documents. He liquidated her entire inheritance within 3 months of her death. Can we recover any of it? Some. He spent a lot, but we've located several large purchases, a boat, a car, gambling debts paid off. We can go after those assets." "And custody?" James hesitated. "That's more complicated. The temporary emergency guardianship will hold, for now because of Abby's medical situation, but for permanent custody." He trailed off, choosing his words carefully. "Matthew, the courts typically favor blood relatives or those with established connections to the children." "Sarah is my connection," Matthew said firmly. "And Jessica. These girls have no one else. There might be relatives we haven't located yet. And frankly, your lifestyle isn't exactly child-friendly. You work 16-hour days, travel constantly." "I can change that," Matthew interrupted. "I will change that." A small noise made him turn. Emma stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. How much had she heard? "We need more popcorn," she said, her voice carefully neutral. After James signed off, Matthew found Emma waiting in the kitchen, methodically arranging popcorn in 4 bowls. "You don't have to change your whole life for us," she said without preamble. "We know this is temporary." Matthew leaned against the counter. "What if I don't want it to be temporary?" Emma looked up, her young face showing the wariness of someone who'd learned early that hope was dangerous. "People always want to help at first, then it gets hard." "I'm not most people," Matthew replied, meeting her gaze directly. "And I don't give up when things get hard." Emma studied him for a long moment, as if searching for the lie in his words. Finally, she handed him 2 of the popcorn bowls. "Sophie likes extra butter," she said simply, but the faint smile that accompanied her words felt like a victory more significant than any business deal Matthew had ever closed. That night, checking on the girls before bed, he found all 3, asleep in their shared room, Sophie's head on Emma's shoulder, Lily curled protectively around her sister's stuffed cat. The sight stirred something profound in Matthew's chest, a feeling both painful and necessary, like a limb regaining circulation after being numb for too long. Abby came home from the hospital on a Thursday morning, her small body still weak, but her spirit undimmed. The moment she stepped into the penthouse, the space transformed, her delighted squeals at the sight of her sisters echoing off the minimalist walls that had never before contained such unbridled joy. "Your house is so big," she exclaimed, eyes wide as she explored on unsteady legs. "Do you live here all alone?" "I did," Matthew answered honestly. "Until now." That evening, after the excitement had settled and Abby was tucked safely in bed with her sisters, Matthew retreated to the balcony with a glass of scotch. The city lights spread below him like a carpet of stars, a view that had once represented everything he'd achieved. Now it seemed strangely hollow compared to the 4 sleeping children inside. The balcony door slid open. Emma stepped out, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill. "Couldn't sleep?" Matthew asked. She shook her head, settling into the chair beside him. "Too quiet. I'm used to city noises, not being above them." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes before Emma spoke again. "Can I ask you something about Sarah?" Matthew tensed reflexively, then forced himself to relax. "Of course. What was she like? Mom told us stories, but—" "She was extraordinary," Matthew began, surprised by how easily the words came after years of avoiding the subject. "Brilliant, stubborn, compassionate, even when she was sick. She worried more about everyone else's feelings than her own. Mom said she never complained, not once." "That's true," Matthew smiled faintly. "She used to say there was no point wasting energy on complaining when you could use it for living, instead." Emma pulled her knees to her chest. "What about her mom? Your wife?" "Caroline," Matthew said, the name rusty from disuse. She died when Sarah was 7. Car accident. So Sarah grew up without a mom too, Emma observed quietly. The parallel struck Matthew with unexpected force. Yes, though I was. Less present than I should have been. After Caroline died, I buried myself in work. That's what adults do, Emma said with the weary wisdom of a child who'd seen too much. They hide from the painful stuff. Matthew studied her profile, so young yet so perceptive. Your mother. Was she sick for a long time? Emma's fingers tightened on the blanket. She started coughing last winter. Said it was just a cold, but it got worse. We couldn't afford doctors after she had to stop working. By the time she went to the hospital. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry, Matthew said, the inadequacy of the words hanging in the night air. Victor showed up 2 days after the funeral, Emma continued, her tone hardening. Said he was our legal guardian now. We'd only met him twice before. Mom married him when I was 9, but he left after a few months. She never even changed our last names. Did your mother leave any messages, videos, letters? Emma shook her head. Just the box of memories. And she made me promise to keep everyone together, no matter what. Her voice grew smaller. I tried, but I couldn't protect them from everything. The weight of responsibility on those young shoulders struck Matthew like a physical blow. Here was a child who'd been forced to become a parent, just as he'd been forced to become a single father. Both unprepared, both determined, both haunted by promises made to the dying. Without thinking, Matthew reached out, placing his hand gently over Emma's. You did protect them. You kept them together, kept them alive. That's more than most adults could have managed. Emma didn't pull away. In the faint reflection of the glass balcony door, Matthew saw a tear slide down her cheek. Miss her so much, she whispered. I know, Matthew replied softly. I still miss Sarah every day. They sat together in the quiet darkness, two souls connected by parallel losses. While inside the penthouse, 3 little girls slept peacefully for the first time in months. 2 weeks had passed since the Miller sisters moved into Matthew's penthouse. What began as an emergency solution had evolved into something resembling a home. Colorful artwork now adorned the refrigerator, throw pillows were perpetually out of place, and the sound of children's laughter frequently echoed through once silent rooms. Today, Matthew sat in his home office surrounded by legal documents. Across from him, James reviewed their strategy for the upcoming custody hearing. The good news, James said, adjusting his glasses, is that CPS's investigation clearly shows the girls were neglected under Victor's care. Abby's medical records, alone, are damning. And the bad news? Matthew asked, bracing himself. Victor's fighting back, claiming you essentially kidnapped the children and are using your wealth and influence to steal them. He's painting himself as a grieving stepfather overwhelmed by tragedy. Matthew's jaw tightened. That's absurd. But potentially effective, James warned. Courts are naturally suspicious when a wealthy single man suddenly wants custody of 4 young girls. A soft knock interrupted them. Emma stood in the doorway, a tray of cookies in her hands. Sophie and Lily made these, she explained. They wanted to thank you for the art supplies. The cookies were misshapen and slightly burned, but Matthew accepted them with genuine appreciation. After Emma left, he turned back to James. What do we need to win this? James spread several documents across the desk. First, concrete evidence of Victor's fraud. Second, testimony about the girls' well-being before and after Jessica's death. And third, he hesitated. We need to demonstrate that you can provide not just financial stability, but emotional support. That you're committed to raising these children long-term. I am committed, Matthew said firmly. Are you? James challenged gently. 3 weeks ago, you lived alone, worked 80-hour weeks and hadn't mentioned Sarah's name in years. Now you want to become an instant father to 4 traumatized children. Matthew fell silent, considering his friend's words. His gaze drifted to a photo of Sarah that now sat on his desk, placed there by Lily, who had found it while exploring the penthouse. I've spent 10 years building an empire that means nothing, he finally said. These girls. They're the first thing that's felt right since Sarah died. James nodded, his expression softening. Then we need to make the courts see that. And we need something concrete on Victor. What about Jessica's safety deposit box, Matthew suggested. Emma mentioned it yesterday. Victor never found the key. James looked intrigued. That could contain exactly what we need. Later that afternoon, Matthew gathered the girls in the living room. He needed to discuss the custody situation to prepare them for the legal battle ahead. But how did one explain complex legal proceedings to children who had already endured so much? I want to talk about the future, he began carefully. About you staying here, with me, permanently. Abby, now recovered and full of energy, looked up from her coloring book. Forever and ever? That's the plan, Matthew nodded. But Victor is trying to make you go back to him. Emma's expression darkened. We're not going back. No, you're not, Matthew assured her. But we need to convince a judge of that. It might get complicated. Sophie, always the thoughtful one, asked, will we have to see him again? Possibly, but not alone. Never alone, Matthew promised. Lily had been quiet throughout the conversation, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. Finally, she spoke. Would we be like your daughters? The question caught Matthew off guard. In his focus on the legal aspects, he hadn't considered what to call this new relationship. Yes, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. If that's what you want. What about our last name? Emma asked. Mom would want us to keep Miller. You could be Miller Porters, Matthew suggested, or keep Miller. Whatever feels right to you. Abby climbed into his lap, a gesture that had become increasingly common. I think Mommy would be happy you're taking care of us. She always said Sarah was watching over us, and now you are too. Matthew's throat tightened as he looked at these four remarkable children who had somehow crashed through the walls he'd built around his heart. The legal path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a decade, Matthew Porter was fighting for something more valuable than business success or financial gain. He was fighting for a family. Dark clouds gathered over the city skyline, pregnant with rain and ominous intent. Weather alerts had been pinging on phones all day, warning of an approaching storm system, potentially the worst to hit the region in decades. Matthew stood at the penthouse windows, watching the sky darken to an unnatural shade of green-gray as the barometric pressure plummeted. Girls, let's finish gathering the emergency supplies, he called, turning away from the view. In the kitchen, Emma and Sophie were filling containers with water while Lily helped Abby sort battery-operated lanterns and flashlights on the dining table. Is it going to be a big storm? Abby asked, her small hands carefully arranging flashlights by size. The weather service says it might be, Matthew answered honestly. Over the past weeks, he'd learned the girls responded better to truth, even difficult truth, than to false reassurances. Emma looked up from her task. What if the power goes out? We have a generator for essential systems, Matthew explained, but we should be prepared anyway. Better safe than sorry. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of activity. After discovering the existence of Jessica's safety deposit box, James had secured a court order to access it. Tomorrow they would open it together, potentially uncovering evidence that would help their case against Victor. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, but tonight, all thoughts were focused on the approaching storm. I don't like thunder, Lily admitted quietly as she helped Matthew tape the windows, an unnecessary precaution at their elevation, but it made the girls feel safer. We'll all stay together in the media room, Matthew assured her. It's the most interior space, away from the windows. By evening, the storm had arrived in full force. Rain lashed against the glass in horizontal sheets and wind howled around the building's edges. The girls had transformed the media room into a cozy fortress, dragging in pillows, blankets, and stuffed animals to create a nest-like environment on the floor. They were halfway through their second movie when the lights flickered, then went out completely. The backup generator hummed to life moments later, but provided only enough power for emergency lighting and essential systems. Everyone okay? Matthew asked. switching on one of their prepared lanterns. 4 small voices answered in the affirmative, though he could hear the tension in their replies. Outside, thunder crashed with such force that the building seemed to tremble. Abby crawled into Matthew's lap, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Tell us a story," she requested, her voice small but determined. "A happy one." Matthew thought for a moment, then began describing Sarah's 6th birthday party, a princess-themed celebration with a castle cake and a real pony. The girls listened intently, asking questions about details and laughing at Sarah's reaction to the pony eating part of her dress. As Matthew spoke, sharing memories he'd kept locked away for so long, he realized something had fundamentally changed. Within him, the pain was still there, but it no longer dominated the memories. He could speak of Sarah with joy now, not just grief. A particularly violent gust of wind slammed against the building, causing a distant crashing sound. Abby whimpered, burrowing deeper into Matthew's arms. "The building is designed to withstand much stronger storms than this," he reassured her, stroking her hair. "We're perfectly safe up here." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the emergency lights flickered and died. The backup generator had failed. In the sudden darkness, Matthew felt the girls move closer, seeking reassurance. He quickly activated several lanterns, creating pools of warm light in the blackness. "The storm must have damaged the generator," he explained, trying to keep his voice calm. "It's okay. We have plenty of lanterns and—" He broke off as Sophie began coughing, a deep wheezing sound that reminded him too much of Abby's illness just weeks before. The cough continued, growing more labored. "Sophie? What's wrong?" Emma asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Can't breathe, right?" Sophie gasped between coughs. Matthew moved quickly to her side, heart racing. "Sophie, do you have asthma?" The little girl nodded, still struggling for breath. "Inhaler, in my bag." Emma was already moving, scrambling, toward the doorway. "I'll get it." Matthew held Sophie upright, coaching her to take slow, controlled breaths as best she could. Lily and Abby watched with wide, frightened eyes. Emma returned moments later, panic evident on her face. "It's not there. I can't find it anywhere." "When did you last use it?" Matthew asked Sophie, trying to remain calm while his mind raced through options. "Yesterday," she wheezed. "Maybe. Bathroom." The situation was escalating quickly. Sophie's lips were taking on a bluish tinge and her breathing was becoming more labored by the second. They needed to find that inhaler, or get her to emergency services immediately. "Emma, check the bathrooms," Matthew instructed. "Lily, look in the kitchen. I'll check the bedrooms." With Abby trailing anxiously behind him, Matthew searched the girl's bedroom, then his own. No inhaler. The storm outside had intensified, rain hammering against the windows with renewed fury. The thought of trying to get Sophie to a hospital in these conditions was terrifying but becoming increasingly necessary. They regrouped in the media room, all reporting the same result. No inhaler found. Sophie was now leaning heavily against the wall, her breathing shallow and rapid. "We need to get her to a hospital," Matthew decided, already mentally calculating the fastest route in the storm. Just then, the landline phone, a feature of the penthouse Matthew had nearly forgotten existed in the cell phone era, began to ring. He answered quickly, hoping it might be building management with news about the generator. Instead, a chillingly familiar voice came through the line. "I know you've got my girls," Victor slurred, the connection crackling with static from the storm. "And I know you're going to that safety deposit box tomorrow. You think you're so smart, but I've got friends at the bank. I know everything." Matthew's blood ran cold. "Victor, now is not the time. Sophie is having a severe asthma attack and needs medical attention." There was a pause, then a harsh laugh. "Little Sophie? Always was a sickly one. Her inhaler's probably in my apartment. I found it last week and forgot to give it back." Oops. The casual cruelty of the statement hit Matthew like a physical blow. "You deliberately took her medication?" "Consider it a reminder," Victor growled. "Those are my kids, Porter. My meal, ticket, and I'm coming to get what's mine." The line went dead. leaving Matthew staring at the receiver in shock and fury. When he turned back to the girls, he saw that Emma had heard every word, her young face a mask of terror. "He's coming here," she whispered. Before Matthew could respond, a new sound cut through the storm's chaos. The elevator alarm indicating someone had triggered the emergency override. Victor hadn't just made a threat. He was already in the building. "Lock the doors," Matthew commanded, instantly shifting into crisis mode. "Emma, help me move Sophie to the master bathroom. It has a lock. Lily, bring water and wet towels." They worked quickly in the dim lantern light as thunder crashed overhead. Matthew's mind raced through options. The building's security was compromised by the power outage, cell service was down, and the landline had gone dead after Victor's call. "He has a key to the service elevator," Emma whispered as they positioned Sophie in the bathroom. From when he worked maintenance in a building like this. Matthew locked the bathroom door, placing Abby and Lily inside with their sister. Emma refused to hide. "I need to help," she insisted, her young face determined beyond her years. They didn't have to wait long. A thunderous pounding at the front door announced Victor's arrival. Matthew positioned Emma behind him and approached cautiously. Through the peephole, he could see Victor, soaking wet, wild-eyed, swaying slightly. In his right hand glinted something metallic. A knife. "I know you're in there, Porter," Victor shouted, slamming his fist against the door again. "Give me those girls or I swear I'll—" Matthew's mind calculated rapidly. Sophie needed medical attention immediately. The penthouse had a private stairwell for emergencies, but 40 flights down with a critically ill child was impossible. He needed to neutralize the threat. "Stay here," he whispered to Emma, moving toward his office. In his desk drawer was a small safe containing the one thing Caroline had insisted on after Sarah was born, a handgun. Matthew had never fired it outside a training range, but its weight was grimly reassuring as Victor began throwing himself against the door. "Emma," Matthew said, returning to the frightened girl, "I need you to do something very brave. The minute I open this door, run to the house phone in my bedroom. It has a direct line to building security in the basement level." Emma nodded, her face pale but resolute. The door splintered near the hinges as Victor rammed it again. Matthew positioned himself, gun concealed behind his leg, and called out, "Victor, stop. I'm opening the door. We need to talk." He unlocked it and stepped back. The moment Victor burst in, knife raised, Matthew moved with unexpected speed, knocking the weapon from his hand and forcing him to the ground with techniques from long ago self-defense classes. "Security!" Emma shouted into the phone. "Penthouse. Emergency, man with weapon!" Victor struggled beneath Matthew's grip, spewing threats and obscenities. "You think you've won? I've got insurance, videos of Jessica admitting to stealing from patients, her reputation goes down, and those brats lose everything." Matthew increased pressure on Victor's arm. "You're lying." Victor's laugh was ugly. "Safety. Deposit box has her confession. Tomorrow it all goes public unless you pay me." "What confession?" Matthew demanded. But Victor had passed out, the combination of alcohol and exertion finally overwhelming him. Within minutes, security arrived. The storm had abated enough for them to access the emergency stairs. As paramedics tended to Sophie and police secured Victor, Matthew held the frightened girls close. "It's over," he promised, "and tomorrow we'll find the truth." The safety deposit box contained no confession. Instead, what Matthew and James found the next morning were carefully organized documents that told a very different story. Video recordings of Victor admitting to forging Jessica's signature, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and most damning of all, a recorded conversation where Victor boasted about setting up the perfect con with Jessica's inheritance. "This is everything we need," James said, reviewing the evidence. "Victor was trying to bluff you last night. These recordings will send him to prison for a long time." But it wasn't just legal evidence Jessica had preserved. The box also contained 4 sealed envelopes, one addressed to each daughter, containing letters and mementos. And there, nestled among her children's legacy, was a 5th envelope simply marked, "For Sarah's father." Matthew's hands trembled as he opened it. "Mr. Porter," Jessica had written, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. and somehow my girls have found their way to you. Sarah made me promise to look after you, but it seems fate had other plans. I hope instead that you might look after my daughters. Sarah changed my life with her courage and kindness. She spoke of you often, worried you'd lose yourself after she was gone. Perhaps in finding my children, you found yourself again. Please tell my girls I love them beyond measure, and please know that Sarah is proud of you wherever she is. With gratitude, Jessica Miller. 3 months passed. Victor remained in jail awaiting trial, the evidence against him overwhelming. The court had awarded Matthew temporary guardianship of the Miller sisters, while the adoption process moved forward. Life had fallen into a rhythm none of them could have imagined before. Today was special, Lily's 11th birthday. The penthouse, once a monument to minimalism, had transformed. Colorful streamers hung from ceilings, balloons clustered in corners, and a handmade "Happy Birthday Lily" banner, Sophie's artistic creation, dominated the living room wall. "Are you sure this isn't too much?" Matthew asked Emma as they put final touches on decorations. His board meeting had been rescheduled to accommodate the party, something the old Matthew would have found inconceivable. Emma smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that had become less rare over the months. "Lily deserves it. We haven't had a real birthday since Mom died." In the kitchen, Sophie and Abby supervised the caterers with comical seriousness, inspecting the cake, chocolate with strawberry filling, Lily's favorite, and counting napkins. Lily was out with her new piano teacher, a strategic distraction before her surprise party. "The guests will arrive in 30 minutes, Matthew's assistant reminded him, checking her tablet. The guest list included Lily's new classmates, teachers, and the therapist who had been helping all 4 girls process their trauma. "Thank you, Angela. And the gift arrived this morning. It's in your office." When Lily returned, the collective shout of "surprise" brought tears to her eyes. For hours, the penthouse, once silent and sterile, echoed with laughter, music, and the happy chaos of children celebrating. After cake, Matthew led Lily to his office. "I have something special for you." In the corner stood a baby grand piano, its ebony surface gleaming. "It's for me?" Lily whispered, approaching it reverently. "Your mother mentioned in her letter how much you loved music. Sarah played too." Matthew knelt beside her. "I thought you might like lessons, real ones." Lily's fingers ghosted over the keys. "It's beautiful. There's one more thing." Matthew handed her a jewelry box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with 2 charms, a musical note and a small heart. "The heart has an inscription," he explained as she examined it. Lily squinted at the tiny words, "Family found, not lost." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with understanding beyond her years. "Because we found each other." "We did," Matthew agreed, his own vision blurring. "And I've filed the adoption papers. If it's still what you all want." He didn't finish. Lily threw her arms around his neck, the necklace clutched tightly in her hand. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered against his shoulder, the first time any of the girls had called him that. Later, as the party wound down and tired children dispersed, Matthew found Emma on the balcony watching the sunset. "Lily called me Dad," he said, still processing the moment. Emma nodded, unsurprised. "That's what you are now. What you've become." Looking at this remarkable 12-year-old who had carried her family through impossible circumstances, Matthew felt a surge of pride and responsibility. They were healing each other, these 4 girls, and himself, filling the empty spaces grief had carved within them all. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons, gradual yet transformative. The penthouse, once a monument to solitude, now overflowed with evidence of childhood. Homework spread across dining tables, instruments practiced in corners, artwork magnetized to refrigerator doors. Matthew's transformation was perhaps the most profound. The ruthless CEO who once scheduled meetings in 15-minute increments now left work promptly at 5, coaching Sophie's science fair project and attending Abby's dance recitals. His assistant had adjusted to scheduling around 4 school calendars with remarkable efficiency. The Sarah Porter Foundation launched with a gala fundraiser supporting pediatric cancer research and assistance programs for families of patients. All 4 Miller sisters attended, dressed in coordinating blues, Sarah's favorite color. "You've changed," James observed, watching Matthew help Abby with her shoes before the event. "For the better, I hope," Matthew replied. Unquestionably, Emma, now 13, had discovered photography capturing their evolving family story through a camera lens Matthew had given her. Her pictures, displayed throughout the penthouse, chronicled their journey. Lily at her piano recital, Sophie winning the science competition, Abby's missing tooth smile, and Matthew, looking younger somehow, the hardness in his face softened by joy. The adoption papers were finalized on a Tuesday morning. The girls chose to become Miller Porters, honoring both their past and future. 2 families that became one, the judge had commented, signing the final documents. Leaving the courthouse, Matthew felt Sarah's presence more strongly than he had in years, not as a painful absence, but as the guiding light that had led him to these 4 remarkable girls who had impossibly become his daughters. "Hold still," Emma laughed, adjusting her camera as Abby wiggled impatiently. The family stood by Sarah's and Jessica's graves, now connected by a garden of daisies the girls had planted between them. Spring sunshine warmed the polished stones and highlighted the fresh flowers arranged by small, careful hands. 6 months after the adoption, their Sunday ritual included this visit, no longer somber but peaceful, even joyful at times. The cemetery had transformed from a place of grief to one of connection. "Perfect," Emma said, capturing the moment with the camera Matthew had given her for Christmas. This photograph would join dozens of others in the leather-bound album they were creating together. The album itself was Emma's idea, a visual story of their unlikely family. The first section contained old photographs, Sarah as a child, Jessica with her daughters, Matthew in happier days. The middle chronicled their journey together, hospital visits, first days of school, holiday celebrations. The final pages remained empty, waiting for future memories. Later that evening, Matthew watched as the girls arranged the day's new photographs. "Do you think they'd be friends?" Sophie asked suddenly. "Sarah and Mom, if they were both here?" "I think they already were," Matthew answered, showing her Jessica's final letter. "And they brought us together somehow." Lily's finger traced Sarah's smile in an old photograph. "They're still part of our family." "Always," Matthew agreed, watching these 4 remarkable children who had rewritten his definition of family, not just those connected by blood or birth, but by love and the invisible threads of fate that had drawn them together. Emma closed the album, but not before adding a caption beneath today's cemetery picture: "2 families becoming one." Exactly 1 year had passed since that fateful day in the cemetery, when 4 little girls with wildflowers had changed Matthew Porter's life forever. Today, the Porter Miller family gathered in the penthouse living room for a special ceremony of their own design. The space had been transformed. No longer the sterile showplace of a solitary billionaire, it was now unmistakably a home. Family photographs lined the walls. A piano occupied the corner where modernist sculptures once stood. Colorful throw pillows and handmade Afghans softened sleek furniture, and children's artwork was framed with the same care once reserved for expensive paintings. "Is everyone ready?" Matthew asked, looking at his daughters gathered in a semicircle. Emma, now 14 and growing into a thoughtful young woman, adjusted her camera on its tripod. Lily sat at the piano, fingers poised and ready. Sophie held a journal filled with her careful handwriting, while Abby, nearly 7, bounced with barely contained excitement. "Today we celebrate Family Day," Matthew began, his voice steady though. His heart was full. 1 year since we found each other. On the coffee table between them sat 2 framed photographs: Sarah at 16, smiling despite her illness, and Jessica Miller with her 4 daughters, taken during happier times. Beside them stood a 3rd frame, currently empty. "In this family," Matthew continued, "we honor those we've lost by living fully in their memory. Lily began playing softly, a piece she had composed herself, hauntingly beautiful. Sophie opened her journal and read a poem about stars guiding travelers home. Abby placed homemade paper flowers before the photographs. Emma, always the protector and now the family historian, stepped forward last. From a folder, she withdrew a digitally created portrait, something she had worked on secretly for weeks. It showed all 6 of them together. Matthew, Emma, Lily, Sophie, Abby, Sarah, and Jessica, as if they had always been one family. Because they're still with us, Emma explained, placing the portrait in the empty frame. And always will be. Matthew felt tears prick his eyes as he looked at the impossible family portrait. The past and present merged into one beautiful whole. The Sarah and Jessica Foundation has now helped 20 families affected by childhood cancer, he announced. And today I've finalized the educational trust for each of you. The practical details were important, but secondary to the deeper meaning of this day. Each girl took turns speaking, sharing memories from the past year and hopes for the future. I used to think family was just who you're born to, Emma said, her voice strong despite the emotion behind it. But now I know it's who stays beside, you who fights for you, who chooses you every day. Matthew watched his oldest daughter with immense pride. The frightened girl who had carried her siblings through impossible circumstances had blossomed into a young woman of remarkable wisdom and compassion. I have something for each of you, he said when they had finished. He handed each girl a small box. Inside were identical gold lockets, each containing 2 small photographs, Sarah on one side, Jessica on the other. To remind us that love doesn't end, he explained. It transforms and continues in new ways. As Matthew helped Abby fasten her necklace, she looked up at him with those innocent eyes that had once asked if he was Sarah's daddy in a cemetery. You know what, Dad? She said thoughtfully. Sarah isn't just your angel anymore. She belongs to all of us now. And so does Mom. Matthew gathered his daughters close, these 4 remarkable children who had crashed through the walls of his grief and taught him to live again. Outside, spring sunshine bathed the city in golden light. Inside, a family bound not by blood, but by something stronger celebrated their unlikely journey from strangers to loved ones. Sarah and Jessica had made a promise to each other years ago beside a hospital bed, one to watch over a grieving father, one to care for 4 vulnerable girls. Neither could have imagined how beautifully that promise would be fulfilled, through loss and love, through pain and healing. As Emma's camera timer counted down, and they posed for their official Family Day portrait, Matthew Porter, once defined solely by wealth and achievement, realized he had received the greatest gift possible, not just a second chance at fatherhood, but a first chance at genuine happiness. The camera flashed, capturing the Porter-Miller family's smiling faces, a moment of perfect joy preserved for the future chapters of their shared story.